I'd like to share a verse from Scripture, and it's James chapter 1. It's a few verses. James chapter 1, verses 2 through to 4. And this is what it says. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face many trials, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. One of the trials I want to focus on today, it doesn't specify trials, the trial of waiting. Someone has estimated that each day we spend anywhere from 3/4 of an hour to an hour just waiting. I want you to think about that. When you're in your car and you're at the red light, you wait for it to turn green. We wait at the checkout after we've got our groceries in our trolley to pay. We wait at the doctor's surgery and they're always late. So we wait. We won't talk about the dentist. When you make a phone call about something and you get connected and then you're given a choice. If it's this you want, press 1. If it's this, press 2. And you wait until all the choices are gone, then you make your choice. And if you can't remember, you have to go back and start again. For me, the worst time of waiting, the hardest for me, is when I do an international plane flight. And you go to the airport, you're supposed to be there 3 hours before. You book your luggage in, you go through customs, and you've probably clocked off half an hour of the 3 hours before your plane leaves. You have 2.5 hours inside that airport to wait. Not much to do in the airport. That's probably my worst. Our culture teaches us that waiting is wasteful, that being busy is good, that we control everything in our lives, at least we try, that there are limits and expectations in which everything must be completed and fixed. I can remember doing a course on time management so that my day, I would achieve heaps in my day. I don't know whether they still run courses like that today. We all seem to try and get heaps done. It teaches us that if we wait, we are somehow being abused. My favourite example of the opposite. Now I want you to picture this. We now have a mall in Bega, and there are some shops that do this as well in Bega. You go to the mall, you walk from the roadside up the footpath, and you come to the main entry. And they're big sliding glass doors. And somehow they know you're coming, because when you get close, they just open. When you go through, they close, all by themselves. How good is that? No waiting. I don't have to knock. I don't have to open the door. It just happens every time. How special is that? That is an example of what I see as our society who does not have to wait. Several years ago, executives at a busy airport faced a problem. They were getting complaint after complaint after complaint, and it all had to do with a baggage claim. For those of you who've been to an airport, you know when you get off your flight, all your bags go to this carousel. Well, people complained because it took so long for their bags to appear on that carousel for them to pick it up. So the executives decided they would increase those little people that work so hard that we never see out in the transfer of the baggage from the plane to that carousel. So they increased the numbers, and their plan worked. They reduced the time it took from the plane to the carousel down to 8 minutes. 8 minutes, and that was well within industry standards. However, the complaints continued. puzzled, the airport executives thought we'd better go and check this out for ourselves. So they went down for a site analysis, and they found it took 1 minute for the passengers to walk from the plane to the carousel, and they stood for 7 minutes waiting for their bags to appear. They realised that passengers did not want to stand and wait, so they decided on a new approach. So what they did is they organised for the plane to arrive at that end of the terminal. Then the baggage would be transferred to the furthest carousel at that end of the airport. So when people hopped off the plane, they spent 6 minutes walking from where they got off to the carousel over there. The complaints went to zero. No more complaints. The reason? Their minds were occupied. They were walking. As they walked, they could talk with somebody, they could get their mobile phone out, they could talk on their phone, they could check the weather. You know, there was things they could do. They were busy. So the conclusion was this: when a person is unoccupied while waiting, his time is a drudgery. Waiting becomes hard, becomes tedious, people become bored, idle, unfulfilled. But when people's minds are occupied, the waiting will not be torture, but will be fun and entertaining. So what can we learn from this today? Every waiting time, therefore, must be occupied, so we can fill it with a purpose. So if we're doing something while we're waiting, we won't be bored. One of the worst words my children used to say to me: I'm bored. This morning, I want to look at 3 stories from the Bible. 3 stories where people had to wait for God to do something. And the first one is in Genesis chapter 12. And if you want to have a look there, Genesis chapter 12, and it's in verse 2 where God makes a promise to Abraham. And he says this: I will make you into a great nation. He was old then. He was 75 years old. He had no children, but he believed God. He believed it was possible for God, because all things are possible for God. Yes? That was his belief. Abraham and Sarah waited 25 years for that promise to be filled. 25 years. Enough time to get disheartened. Abraham at the end of that time is now 100. And Sarah is well past childbearing, yet she falls pregnant. And God gives them a miracle child. But their faith did waver over those 25 years of wait. They even tried to give God a hand with Abraham having a child to the servant girl Hagar. That time of waiting must have been so hard. They would think, how much longer, Lord? When is this going to happen? In our humanity, we want answers to questions like this. Living with the unknown is really hard. During this time, their faith and trust in God was tested. When the Lord came to Abraham to tell him that in 12 months Sarah would have a child, Abraham, you would have a son, Sarah laughed because she thought it was all over. She was too old to have children. But God did not forget his promise. And finally they had a child and they called him Isaac. David says in Psalms 27:14, wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. The second story I want to share with you this morning, the children of Israel. So further on in history, the children of Israel had escaped Egypt by the power of God, and led by Moses, they had finally come to the place of Mount Sinai, and they'd camped in the valley below Mount Sinai. God calls Moses to come up to the mountain, which he does. And Moses is away a number of weeks, and then in Exodus chapter 32:1, there's this statement: when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." Never had they faced so much change. They now had their freedom of choice. They were no longer slaves. They were waiting for someone who may not return and a God they could not see. So, as we just read, they pressure Aaron to make them a God they can see. A lifetime of Egyptian memories are hard to shake. God had a plan for them, an amazing future, but they would need to trust him and exercise patience as they were to wait for God to fulfill his promises. What God does in us while we wait is as important as what we're waiting for. Let me share that with you again. What God does in us while we are waiting is just as important as what we are waiting for. Let me share with you a story of trust. Henry Newen writes about some friends who he got to meet who were trapeze artists. I don't know whether the circus was here just recently, and I didn't go, but whether they still have trapeze artists at modern day circuses today. But Henry got to know the flying rodellas, and he found that there is a special relationship between the person who flies and the catcher. As you might imagine, the relationship is even more important for the person who flies. So that's the person who has to let go and fly through the air and hope that the catcher catches them. So when that moment comes for him to let go and he arcs through the air, he has to remain as still as possible to wait for those strong hands of the catcher to pluck him out of the air. This is what the trapeze artist said to Henry: "The flyer must never try to catch the catcher. The flyer must wait in absolute trust. The catcher will catch him. He must just wait." That's the way it is with us and God. We must wait in absolute trust. God will make things happen when the time is right. We just need to wait. The Bible is so full of examples of people who had to wait. But let's look at one more, a New Testament example. In John 11, verse 32, and it's great to have a bit of competition this morning. There's something very special on over there. In John chapter 11, verse 32, it says this: "When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, he fell at his feet and said, she fell at his feet and said, 'Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.'" And she's echoing what her sister Martha had already said in verse 21. And this statement is so packed full of emotion. Her brother was dead. But in there is also a statement of faith and trust. She knew Jesus well enough that he would happily have healed her brother if he was there. They had sent word to Jesus, and we get a behind-the-scenes look, because if you go back to verse 3, it says that they sent Jesus word, letting him know that Lazarus was sick. And this is how they put it: "Lord, the one you love is sick." Then they waited for Jesus to come and waited some more. And they thought, when Jesus comes, Lazarus will be made well. In verse 6 of chapter 11, this is where we start to get the story behind the scenes. We read Jesus stayed where he was for 2 more days. The travel to Bethany was 1 day's travel. So he didn't rush to the home of Mary and Martha and Lazarus. There was something else happening here. When he finally arrives, Lazarus has been in the grave for 4 days. It was too late. Humanly speaking, he was too late. For God the Father, this was an opportunity to show the world that Jesus, his Son, was the Messiah, the Saviour of the world, who had power over the grave. Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. He is reunited with his sisters. When Jesus finally came, something more amazing happened than if he had been there to heal him from the grave. One thing, they're persistent. Mary and Martha's waiting had gone from hope to loss and sadness, and then to amazing joy. And it was all part of God's plan. We are waiting on God today to do something. Are we not? John 14, 2 and 3. It's something I learnt a long time ago. In my Father's house are many mansions or rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. And now I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Mary, you've learned it too. Rex, I see you. How lovely it is to know something like this. Here we have a promise of Jesus, and he's coming again, and he has a place he wants to take us to. But I love what it says in verse 1. Do not let your hearts or minds be troubled. Trust me. We are the flyer. He is the catcher. At the end of the Bible, in the last chapter of Revelation, John closes by saying, the one who testifies to these things says, behold, I am coming soon. We are waiting for Jesus to return. In that waiting, we need to keep busy. There will be time to practice patience and trust, allowing God to build up our faith. So we can know with confidence that when the time is right, Jesus will come. There's a common thread in these 3 stories. All of them experienced a delay. Today there is a delay in Jesus' return, but the promise is sure. But we will need to wait. This is the trial we all share. Hebrews 10:25 says, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. May your waiting pass quickly as you wait for him to come.